President Trump's demand that the Justice Department investigate whether former President Joe Biden and his aides unlawfully used an auto pen to sign presidential documents reportedly has hit a wall. Federal prosecutors are dropping the criminal probe because they were not able to move forward with the case against Joe Biden. That's according to three people briefed on the matter speaking to the New York Times. The Times reports the investigation, which was run by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington under Jeanine Pirro, ultimately found no viable criminal case and now has been quietly abandoned. The auto pen case focused on Trump's claim the pardons Biden made in his final month of office were not valid because Biden supposedly lacked mental capacity and had to rely on aides using the auto pen. Biden has called those claims completely false, saying he personally made all clemency decisions. Join us now, the co-author of that piece, investigative reporter for the New York Times, Michael Schmidt. Mike, good morning. Great to see you. We'll remind our viewers that the auto pen is used routinely by all presidents, including President Donald Trump. So this, I think, is not terribly surprising to people who first heard about this case, that it wasn't going anywhere. But how did it fall apart?
They couldn't find a law, to hang this thing on.
Well, that hurts.
Look, this is a story about the inability to bring the case against Biden, but this is also a story about how the Trump Justice Department continues to fail to do what Donald Trump wants it to do. He wanted the Justice Department to seek retribution and vengeance against those people who he didn't like. He wanted them indicted and put in jail. And in most cases, so far, we have seen them struggle to do that. They struggled on the 6 who Trump accused of sedition. They've struggled on Comey and James. They struggled here again. And it's in the larger story of retribution, the arc of retribution, where Trump comes out of the gate with such momentum. By the time he gets to December and they really start to zero in on putting these people in jail, they have run into roadblock after roadblock. Sometimes those roadblocks have been at the grand jury on the 6 who he accused of sedition. In this case, it was with the prosecutors who never even went to the grand jury to actually try and bring the indictment. They've run into judges, but this is where his power has been checked in different ways. They haven't given up on this. There's nothing in this Justice Department is dead by any means. We saw the other day that the Justice Department had gone out and put a filing to the federal court saying we are walking away from trying to defend the executive orders against the law firms, only for the walk away to be reversed just hours, less than a day later. So who knows? But for now, these cases have run into different roadblocks, and this one being the latest.
There's some reporting that President Trump saw you discussing your piece on this show about the law firms and was surprised to learn that they were backing away and asked that to get fired up again. So in this case on the auto pen, this was part of a narrative, as we were just discussing, that Donald Trump had put out there during the campaign and carried over into his second term here, which is that Joe Biden was incapacitated and they had to use a machine to sign documents. Did the people in charge, did Ed Martin, even Jeanine Pirro, did they understand that this was nonsense, that Donald Trump had used that himself and they pursued it anyway? Or did they have convictions that there might be some kind of a case here?
I don't know if Ed Martin did. I think Jeanine Pirro seems to have a larger understanding of maybe how the world works than Ed Martin. I think that Jeanine Pirro is trying to straddle that line between being Donald Trump's, U.S. attorney in a really important office while trying to, keep things on the track. I think that's really difficult. I've watched people try and do that now for, 2 different terms, and usually it doesn't end well. This, again, is not an issue where, many people say one thing on one side, legal beagles say another thing on another. This was pretty clear. There was an OLC DOJ memo that said this was okay. The use of the auto pen, how Joe Biden made decisions, I would say pretty interesting. Those are really important, interesting things. What's interesting and maybe controversial is not criminal. And when you talk to people in the FBI or the Justice Department or anyone else in federal law enforcement who are confronting these attempts by Trump to use the criminal justice system to jail his enemies, what they say is that there's just a lot of things Donald Trump doesn't like that aren't criminal. And this is probably a good example of that.
Yeah, and certainly, as you point out, a lot of these efforts at retribution have failed. But there's still, we shouldn't gloss over the idea that there were people in the Department of Justice who were willing to at least try to do President Trump's bidding to carry out his wishes here. I wanted to ask you, though, relatedly, we talked at the top of the show, President Trump calling around sort of unhappy with the job performance of Secretary Kristi Noem. How safe is Pam Bondi in her job? Because there does seem to be, that you've heard, some growing frustration that she has been unable to execute some of President Trump's wishes.
Yeah, look, I think to the public, Pam Bondi looks like, a Trump lackey and political ally who will do what he wants, one of his former personal lawyers. But Bondi's department has not followed through on what Trump wanted. Go back to the Truth Social post from September, where he tells Bondi, to follow through on these indictments of these different individuals. Some of those individuals were indicted. They were able to get those indictments, but they weren't able to get them to stick. Some of the other names of the people that Trump put in that Truth Social post, I believe, have not been indicted. So the larger retribution campaign, while having a big impact on the law firms, having a big impact on higher education, I'm not diminishing what has happened to these individuals who have been indicted and those people who have faced criminal scrutiny from the department, but it has not been the clean kill, certainly, that Trump thought it would be in terms of being able to do unto others what was done unto him.
Right. So while we're on Pam Bondi, the House Oversight Committee has voted to subpoena the Attorney General to appear for a closed-door deposition as part of its investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. Jackie Alemany, what are you hearing about this? And will we see pictures and video as we did with Hillary Clinton?
Mika, that's a very good question. It's really unclear, but there are around 50,000 documents that the Wall Street reported yesterday that are missing from the dump of the Epstein files, which is why, in part, why you saw Nancy Mace introduce the move to subpoena and call in Pam Bondi yesterday. There were a number of Republicans who voted with Democrats on this: Nancy Mace, Lauren Boebert, Tim Burchett, Michael Cloud, Scott Perry. These are hardcore MAGA Trump supporters who feel that Pam Bondi's response has been wholly inadequate. It's unclear whether or not she's actually going to appear behind closed doors for a closed-door deposition. But if she doesn't, Congress has already signaled members on that committee that they're willing to pursue inherent contempt charges against Pam Bondi. Of course, that often relies on a referral to the Justice Department for criminal contempt. That falls under Pam Bondi's jurisdiction. It's unlikely that she's actually going to be arrested and put in the House, the congressional jail. But needless to say, this is a very big and powerful statement coming from House members who want accountability here, primarily with regards to unverified allegations of sexual misconduct against Donald Trump that has not been included in these files, that and a lot of survivors who feel like there are other documents about co-conspirators and their experiences that are missing so far.
Absolutely. And there are not just survivors and Democrats who want answers on this Jeffrey Epstein massive scandal, but some Republicans as well. MS Now's Jackie Alemany, thank you very much.